Hello and welcome to the first class of our Introduction to Roto and Paint course. My name is Richard and I am an experienced digital compositor with over 10 years in the visual effects industry. I'm going to be taking you through all 10 classes of the course, starting off with our initial Introduction to Nuke, right through to our last class where we'll put everything together to produce a showreel worthy paint and roto shot that you guys can use out in the world. The course is going to be structured into two halves. The first 5 classes are going to be focusing mainly on rotoscoping, and then the last 5 classes will be paint or prep related with kind of roto tasks included as well. Before starting the course, we're assuming that everybody has at least a basic understanding of Nuke or node-based workflows. If not, I would definitely advise that you familiarize yourself with the way Nuke works. There are many resources available online on YouTube, and it'll give you a good head start before we get stuck in to the kind of specifics of rotoscoping and paint. So in this first class, we're going to be covering the following: getting used to Nuke and the interface, the fundamentals of rotoscoping and why it's important, analyzing a shot based on a brief that you've been provided by your supervisor or the Roto and Paint lead, making notes and analyzing a shot to help you complete your roto task, and finally, an introduction and explanation of the roto node and the different functions and tools within that. So the first thing we're going to do whenever we start any project is we're going to make sure the project is saved. So in the assets folder that has been provided to you, you should find a plate that is named AXL001_BG01. So the first thing we need to do is read that plate in. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to hit the R key and we're going to find the plate in the folder, click on it and hit open. Now we have this in our script. We can go ahead and name our shot by clicking File, Save Comp As. Traditionally, naming conventions in rotoscoping will be as follows: AXL_001 is the shot code, BG01 would be the name of the plate that's been provided to you, so in this case it's background 1. Roto would be the task that you have been assigned, so if this is a prep task or a comp task, this would say prep or comp, and then version 1, and then .nuke at the end for the nuke script. Quite often in studios that you'll work at, this will all be set up for you. You will not have to manually file save as. There will be a pipeline in place which automatically creates these shot naming structures for you, but it is really useful to know how to do this anyway. It's important to have V001 at the end, because if you go to File and Save New Comp Version, it will automatically version up and make your new script version 2 every time you hit that button. So we're going to double click on the plate and see some of the details. We can see here that the plate is a format size of 2560 by 1080. That is the resolution of the plate. You'll also see it in the viewer window here if you press 1 on the plate for it to appear up here. The frame range is 1001 to 1130, and the color space is set to default linear, which is perfectly fine for our case. Usually plates will come in starting at 1001. This is a common thing in the visual effects industry. It's so that if there is a change in the edit, if they need to send out new frames over to the VFX guys, they can add more frames before 1001. However, if you started on frame 1, you can't go into minus frames. So it's kind of a bit of a buffer. So you'll see at most studios, all plates will start around 1001. So what we're going to do, once we know this information, as I've written here, I'm going to press the S key to open up the project settings. And then I'm going to go into here to the frame range and make sure this information matches the information of the read node and plate that we've just brought in. So 1001 to 1130. I'm then going to hit lock range. Frame rate doesn't really matter so much in this case because we're going to be using image sequences and rendering image sequences out. But for viewing purposes, it's good to put that. And then the full size format is 2560 by 1080, which should match this. It's super important to make sure this is correct before we do any rotoscoping work, because the tools we're going to use reference this resolution here. So if we are to use a roto node, for example, to do rotoscoping work, it will assume that the project size is the same as whatever it says in here, not what it says in the read node. So we need to make sure this matches exactly what the read node is saying. Once we've done that, we are ready to go. One last thing you can do just to help if your computer is particularly slow or if the server is slow, you can go into the node here and there is a localization policy. You can click on, and what that'll do, you'll see a big green bar appear on the top. You might need to go to the cache settings at the top and hit localization and unpause. What this will do is if you are reading this from a server that is particularly slow, localization will download that file to a cache on your machine so that it can run much faster on your direct drive. And then this is now stored on your machine, so should run much faster. So just a quick overview of the interface in case anyone needs a refresher. The right hand side here is where the properties panel will go, so every time you make a new node, all of the properties will appear here. You can limit the number of property panels or boxes that appear by changing the number 10. So if I want only 2 properties to appear at any time, if I make some nodes, you'll see that no more appear every time I add new nodes. It will just get rid of the oldest node that you had. I like to do that so it's nice and neat in this window. 3 is usually a nice number and they fit nicely into this box. So the node graph is where all your nodes will go. The viewer is where you'll view your image. The viewer corresponds to the numbers on your keyboard, so if I wanted to look at this plate here, I would click on it and press 1, and you'll see the viewer now has a number 1 assigned to it. If I had another plate to look at, I could press 2, and now the viewer is looking at 2, which in this case is just this transform node which has no image. Up on the top here you'll see we've got the RGBA color channels. Again, all this stuff isn't really relevant. The default kind of view for now is enough to work with for what we need. And along here you've got the timeline frame numbers that we've just set in the project settings. You'll see it's set to global right now. That global corresponds to whatever we've set here in the frame range. And then along the left side here you've got a bunch of tools. Quite often these aren't used, so I normally just get rid of this. And that is because you can find all the tools you need by either using keyboard shortcuts such as the R key to read, W key to write, and so on, or you can hit tab and find any node you want. So that has been the Nuke interface. So once all that is set up, we're ready to go, and now we can start looking at why rotoscoping is important and why we do it. So we have this shot, and essentially the base reason why we do any rotoscoping work is to cut something out so we can put something else behind it, or to cut something out so that we can manipulate that separate to other objects in the scene. In this case, let's say we wanted to isolate this phone. If we were on a visual effects set and we really wanted to get rid of this phone, we could have put a green screen behind there. There isn't a green screen behind there, so if I was to try and key this, you'll see I get a really choppy and chattery edge, and that's because obviously it's not a green screen. So rotoscoping is used whenever there are areas that need to be cut out or removed that don't have a nice keyable edge or haven't been planned to be keyed with a green screen and so on. So her shirt could probably be keyed using a blue keyer, but again, rotoscoping would be much more accurate, and in this case there's so many different tones in the blue that you would have a difficult time to do so. So quite often in a visual effects studio they'll have a green screen, but there'll be elements of a shot that might need extra rotoscoping to tidy up an edge or where the green screen is particularly bad. So in this case I've got the key that I attempted with the phone here just by using a green keyer after looking in the green channel. I pre-multed it in order to cut it out, and you'll see it's a horrible edge. And then if you compare that to a version I did with rotoscoping, you'll see it gives us a much cleaner edge for a compositor to work with. So if we merge that over here, you'll see the difference between there and there. So the main reason we're doing any rotoscoping work is to provide a much cleaner edge to a compositor. And quite often rotoscoping happens when either there's been problems on set and they haven't done a green screen, or it's a particularly bad green screen, or it needs to have a blend with a particular surface or a floor, or in general they just haven't done any green screen work at all and the rotoscoping has been planned and expected to happen. So why it's important? It's important because without it, compositors wouldn't be able to do their work. A lot of these tasks are done by a compositor, but the reason why it's assigned to a specific roto artist is because it's a very specific and very technical and sometimes tricky task to do. That's very specialized, and it takes a lot of time. But if it's done right, then it's really useful for a compositor, and he can use this to now do whatever he likes. So let's say we are provided this shot by your supervisor, and you've been given a brief. So the next step is to analyze a shot based on a brief that you've been provided. So I have quickly mocked up a kind of simple brief. It's very similar to the sort of thing you would get in a visual effects studio. Quite often we use something called Shotgun, which is a shot management software, and this sort of image you'll find displayed on Shotgun on the task that you've been assigned. So you will be assigned the roto task by a producer, and then you will be given this image which tells you exactly what you need to do. So in this case, we are to roto the full frame range, which is 1001 to 1130, and then the R, B and G here are the channels that correspond to the colors here that you see on the screen. So the red will be the phone, the blue will be the table, and the green will be the foreground arm up to the elbow. They are split into R, G and B because when we come to render our rotoscoping at the end, we can actually split our roto into the 3 different color channels. We'll go through that towards the end of the course, but for now it's just important to understand that these 3 elements need to be separately rotoscoped so that we can split them up later into different layers. So now we know this information, we can now watch the shot and see what's going on, and then see how we're going to tackle or approach the different areas in the shot. So again, I'm going to hit space here just to full screen, and then I can look down here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press 1 on the plate, I'm going to full screen the plate, and now we're going to watch it. So what we can see here is that the shot is static, as in it's locked off. There is no camera move happening. So what that means is the elements that are on the table, we won't have to necessarily do any tracking work for. So we can get away with just doing kind of very simple rotoscoping. We don't really need to analyze much in the way of this. However, the main thing that's moving in the shot is the girl here who's picking up a glass with her arm, and we know we need to rotoscope this arm, so this is where the bulk of the work is going to take place. It is worth noting that looking at this shot from a distance, it might look like the shot is static, but it's always worth zooming in and just checking really close to make sure there is actually no movement happening, because quite often there's vibrations that take place and you might see that the actual shot is shaking a little bit, and then you might actually need to do a track in order to rotoscope these elements here. In this case, it looks like it's pretty stable and we're not going to have to do anything. I like to draw just a quick box live just to see if it's shaking at all, and it looks like it's fine. So in terms of rotoscoping this and this, we don't really have to worry too much at this stage. It's going to be a simple job. However, this is moving constantly in the shot, and this is where the bulk of the work of this roto shot is going to take place. So quite often, we didn't mention this earlier, but there will be a bid day assigned to this. So when I say bid day, I mean how much time has been assigned in the bidding process for the shot by the producers or the VFX supervisor to get these tasks done. So a typical task like this, you would expect to be given up to maybe 1.5 days or 2 days, depending on the amount of quality and detail there is. If there were any hair details or things like that that we had to rotoscope, obviously the time for this would go up. So when we're looking at this shot, looking at the bid days is really important to look at this because it tells us how much time we have to spend doing this shot. It's always best, obviously, to get things done as fast as you can. However, it kind of gives us an idea of how much detail and how much time we actually have to put into this. So when we're structuring this, we need to think of how long this and this is going to take, and then how long we have left to do this arm. These are very simple elements that will be done in less than an hour, less than half an hour for both of them probably. And that means the rest of the time, the whole 1.4 or 1.5 days, we'll have to do this arm. So we're happy that this and this are going to be simple elements. So let's now look at how we are going to approach the arm to rotoscope this. So let's watch this. So the main thing you need to take into account when you're doing any roto is the overall movement of the thing you are going to roto. So in this case, we need to look at the arm and see when the key poses are in this movement that she's doing in order for us to do the least amount of keyframes when it comes to doing our roto work. So what I mean by that is that she's got very distinct motions happening. So from 1001 to around 1007, she's got a very clear grabbing the glass, and then she pauses. And then from about 1009 to about 1027, her elbow comes back and she settles again. And then from about 1029 onwards, she lifts it up to her face, drinks, and then from 1062 to 1090, she's drinking from the glass. And then after that, there's a very distinct rotational movement in the glass, but the elbow is not moving. And then from around 1004, the whole arm rotates down again, settles, and then she settles all the way to the end. So the reason why I'm looking at these key poses, I will call them, is because when we do our roto shapes, and I'll demonstrate now, if we get these key poses correct, we'll find that we'll have to do way less work in between, as in between keyframes. So if you are used to doing any animation work, you'll understand what I mean when I say in-betweens. So in-betweens are the keyframes you'll have to do in between the master keyframes. So when you're approaching a roto shot, you really have to think about this in animation terms, because she is animated, she is moving, and then we need to think about the key end poses that she is doing so that we can get those lined up, and then you'll find that a lot of the in-between keyframes are already done for you. So making notes to help complete your roto task, this is exactly what we've just done. So under here you'll see I've made some arm keyframe notes, and all of these frame numbers here correspond to everything I've just said when we were analyzing the shot. So I've gone through from 1001 to 1006. It's a very distinct motion. She's going to pick up the glass, and then from 1006 to 1009 she kind of settles and grabs the glass, and then from 1009 to 1028 she kind of brings the glass back with her elbow tucked in, and then from there she kind of settles for about 10 frames where she's kind of figuring out what to do. And then from about 1038 to about 1057, the glass is lifted to her face. And then 1057 to 1084, she's drinking. And then 1084 to 1093, she's kind of still drinking but settling and finishing the drink. And then from 1093, her arm rotates and she takes the glass away from her face until around 1001. You'll see there's a very distinct hand motion there. It's only the hand that's really rotating there. We need to think about this in terms of different limbs. So when we do our master keyframes from 1093 to 1101, this elbow is not moving that much. So there's not really going to be a major movement we need to deal with there. But then from 1001 onwards to 1125, there's a very obvious rotational movement in the arm happening. And then she settles, and then from 1125 to 1130, she finishes the motion. So I'll demonstrate this now with the roto node in really simple kind of bulky frames. But for example, if I were to go into this task without doing this analyzing and just guessing, I'm going to go into here and I'm just going to maybe, let's say I wanted to just draw, again, we're going to go into the specifics on how to do masking and things like that next week, but for demonstration purposes, I'm going to draw a very simple shape that is representative of her arm. So I'm just going to guess this now. Let's say I've not got these keyframes, so I don't know what they look like. So I'm going to go to here and I'm just going to go, right, where does she, I'm just going to try and guess. So let's lift that up. Okay, and then I'm just going to kind of roughly do this. Okay, so there's a kind of rough animation I've just done with our roto, and you'll see what's happening here. So you can see that the roto is kind of following what's going on, but it's not perfect. It's not taking into account the actual settles that are going on. For example, here, she's actually settled, however we didn't take that into account. And then the roto shape is still moving a lot. Same with here, so we've got this motion still happening, but it's only really her arm at the top and the glass that's rotating there, but our roto shape is still following it and not catching up in time. You'll see the same here. I did a keyframe at the end, however I didn't factor in the fact there's a settle here. That's why the shape is already moving up. So if I were to now go into here and do the exact same process, but put our keyframes on these master keyframes, you'll notice that it follows much better. So I'll just do a quick version of that. So let's go to, so I'm going to go to here, let's just do a quick roto. Again, like I said, we're going to go into the specifics of rotoscoping and which shapes to use and things like that, and how to break up shapes. This is very much rushed and rough for now, just for visual purposes. But you'll see, right, so there is one keyframe. You can see the keyframe based on the timeline here, 1130, it turns blue if there's a keyframe, and every time I move to a new frame in the sequence and move the roto shapes, you'll see that the blue line appears to represent a new keyframe. So I'm working from the end, so I'll now go to 1125, and then I'll just see how much has changed. So let's go to like there, and then 1101 is the next keyframe I've highlighted. So I'm going to now rotate this and just roughly put that into place. Obviously this can be done better. And then we'll go to 1093, which is our next keyframe in the sequence. And then we'll go to 1084, which is again our next keyframe. And then 1057. And then 1038 is the next motion that happens. Again, this is all very rough. We're going to go into more detailed roto next week. And then 1028 is the next settling pose we've got going on. So I'll keep nudging this. And then 1020, 1009 is the next keyframe. So we'll go to there. And then the next one is our 1006, where there's a bit of a settle happening. And then 1001, she lifts her arm back up and pulls it away. So, what we've got here now is a keyframe on every single one of those frames that we've identified when we analyze the shot. And now you'll notice, if I watch through, the motion is much better at following what's going on, and it's kind of doing a lot more of the in-between work, and it's not lagging behind as much because we've factored in all those settle poses into our keyframe animation. So you can see By analyzing the shot and seeing where the master movements are, it's really helping us limit the number of keyframes we're going to have to do when we eventually come to do this shot. So that is why it's super important to kind of really watch the shot first before you do any work. Before you commit to doing any keyframes or any roto shapes, watch the shot and see where those master movements are. See how the wrist changes differently to the actual arm and elbow itself, and then you can factor that in when you come to do your rotoscoping. Once you have analysed everything and you are confident that you know exactly what is happening in the shot, you know if there's a camera move, you know how the limbs and how the body is moving, you know the things that are going to require more attention or the things that are going to require less attention, that is when you would start bringing in a roto node and thinking about how you're going to split up your shapes and things. So to end this class, we're going to do a quick introduction to the roto node and the kind of different shapes and tools and things in here that you need to know. So in order to bring in a roto node, you can either press tab and type in roto and then hit enter and you'll get a roto node, or you can press the O key, which is much quicker, and that brings in a roto node. So I already have one here. So the main functions of a roto node is you've got, it's green, usually green nodes are roto nodes, and then at the top here you'll have a background input which can be used to plug into here. We're not going to plug that in now. And then the right hand side you'll have a mask input, which you'll see this on a lot of different nodes in Nuke. It's used so that you can kind of mask different areas of the shot or different areas of whatever tool you're using based on another rotoscope. And at the bottom here you've got an arrow. Again, this basically implies that you plug something in at the top and then something else can be added after it. So if I were to add another roto node by clicking this and pressing O, you'll see another one gets joined in underneath at the bottom. So the main features of the roto node are as follows. So when you double click it, you'll be given the roto window here. So you've got the roto tab. This is where you'll find all of your shapes. So if I were to draw a shape now, you'll see it appear here. So within here we can rename things, so circle, and then we can also make new folders. So I can click the root folder here, press the plus symbol, and it will make a layer, and I can put that in there. So it's very useful to know for organizational purposes. So I can split this up here and put it in a table, and whatever you want to do. And then every shape that you generate is going to have its own opacity, feather, and fall off settings, and you click on each one and you can change those individually. On the transform tab, you'll find this is where you can add any animation or keyframe or track information to any layers within your project, and then you'll see that links to the translate Y, rotate, scale, X, and Y. If you've ever seen a transform node before, you'll see that matches up identically to that. There is a motion blur tab. This is super important for when we come to do any motion blur work. Nuke is really good at calculating motion blur per layer or per shape. So you'll see here on the circle, there is a little motion blur symbol just here. If I tick that, you'll see it corresponds to whether it's turned on in the motion blur tab here. And then you can go in and change the motion blur settings dependent on the project you're working on. Then we have the shape tab. This isn't used very often in rotoscoping, so I'm not going to go too much into it. And then the clone tab, again, not really used too much in the roto node. Lifetime tab, this is very useful for roto because this is how you can essentially turn on and off a layer. So if we only wanted this circle to be on between frame 1050 and 1100, we could go into here and set this from frame range and set that to 1050 to 1100, and then you'll see, and I look at the alpha channel here, when I go past frame 1100 you'll see the alpha disappears there, and if I go before 1050 it disappears as well. And then the tracking tab, we don't need to worry about this, we'll do any tracking work in a different tab. So really the only tabs you need to worry about here are roto, transform, motion blur, and lifetime. The other ones are really not useful. So in the actual roto tab again, this is where we'll do all of our roto work. So I'll click on here and go back to our plate. So again, like I said, if you click on a folder, and you bring in a shape, it will automatically put that shape in that folder that you're clicked on, and it will always default the lifetime to be all or every frame. You can even go into here and change the colors of the layer in case you want to be able to identify it based on a color per object. So up on the left here you'll see the select tool. So this is the tool you'll use to select roto. So if you want to grab a roto shape, you'll be on this tool, and then you can select individual points. You can grab all of the points and then move it around together. And similarly with that, once you've grabbed all of the points, you can now use the keyboard shortcuts Control and Shift to kind of distort or warp like an overall shape into position. Or if you hold Control and drag one side, you can kind of scale from one side. And then you can kind of scale outwards again, as you would with any kind of stuff in Photoshop or any kind of image manipulation tools. So this is really useful because when we come to do any roto work, we're going to want to be manipulating entire shapes together like this. So we can do the same thing if we select both of these shapes, we can now manipulate these together, if that makes sense. Normally we'll keep this on select all, but you can go in here and select different points and splines and feathers. Again, usually you're going to keep this on select all. And then below that we've got the points tool, and this essentially is a way to add or remove points after the fact. So if we make a shape, we've already drawn the points, but let's say we wanted to add more points to this shape, we could go into add points here and then add a point. Or similarly we can go to remove points and then remove a point. Again, useful tool, providing that you're not doing this on an animated spline. So it's always good to make sure that you have kind of finalized the look of your roto shape before you start animating it. So otherwise the points that you're going to delete are going to change over time, and you're not going to be able to be consistent with that. So again, quite often I wouldn't use this tool because I've already done all my shapes, and if I mess up or draw my shape wrongly, I'd rather just start again with a new shape. So next in the list, this is where you'll find all of your kind of tools that you're going to use for drawing shapes. So you've got a Bezier, you've got the cusped Bezier, a B-spline, an ellipse, a rectangle, a cusped rectangle, and an open spline. These are all going to be used, well, maybe not all of them. We're going to use maybe 3 or 4 of these tools going forward, and we're going to go into the specifics of these next week and which ones to use for which task. But this is where you'll find them. In order to kind of quickly jump to your splines, you can hit the V key and you'll see it quickly jumps back to drawing. This is really useful if you're drawing lots of shapes over and over again. So let's say I wanted to draw a new shape there. Once you've finished the shape, it automatically defaults back to select all, and I can no longer draw any more shapes. So if I want to quickly draw another shape, I can press the V key, and then I can easily go back and start drawing more shapes. So the other kind of features of this are the tools up here, and these are just more kind of visual tools or keyframe tools. So these ones all here to the left of kind of this, anything with the eye or to the left here is all visual. So if I wanted to, I can go into here, I can start turning off how it looks in my display. I can hide certain things that are distracting me from my roto if I wanted to. Splines, points if I wanted to, add numbers to the points. This is a ripple tool. We'll go into this eventually down the line, but essentially what this does is it kind of, if you have an animated shape and you make a change to it, this will apply that change on the whole animation throughout the shot. Again, we'll go through this eventually, but for now it's nothing that you need to worry about. And then in here we've got the set a key on the current frame or remove a key. This corresponds to, over here you'll see set a key and set a key. If I wanted to, I can go into here and make a key, and you'll see it makes a blue little line on the timeline here because I'm making a new key. This is useful, especially if you kind of establish that there's no movement happening and you want to kind of lock it on a specific frame. So I can go to maybe this frame here, keyframe that, especially if I know there's now about to be a change in the motion. I could then go in and change the motion if I wanted to. So in general, those are kind of the only tools we're going to use when we're looking at our roto node. The only other thing you're going to do is every now and then you're going to flick back and forth with the A key to look at alpha channels, and then 1 and 2 you're going to be flicking back and forth a lot between different plates, and for example in this view you'll be doing a lot of kind of pressing 1 here and 2 here and flicking back and forth to check your edges. So it's really important to make sure you know kind of the keyboard shortcuts for viewing. So we want to be able to flick back and forth to check edges quickly, and maybe press A to look at the alpha channels, because those are all the kind of things you need to be looking at as a roto artist. But overall, the roto interface here is very simple, and the main thing we need to worry about is this area, the transform tab, and the kind of tools we're using on the left. So hopefully now you should have a better understanding of why rotoscoping is important and how to approach a roto task that's assigned to you. And hopefully you'll be able to navigate the Nuke interface and the roto node as well. In our next class, we're going to be delving more into using the roto node and using different tools to tackle a specific shot. In this case, we're going to be looking at this shot and how to tackle this task that I've briefed in this class. We're going to focus on proper breakdown of shapes, so we're not going to, let's find my earlier example of a terrible roto. We're not going to be breaking shapes down like this. We're going to focus on how to properly break these down into different elements and fingers and different kind of overlapping layers. And then we're going to decide which splines we're going to use for which task. So in this case I've used a B spline, but there are Beziers here, B splines, open splines, and deciding when is appropriate to use each one. And then we're going to look at how motion blur works, because there's quite a lot of motion blur in this roto shape here, so I can show you how to turn that on, where to place your edges in order to get the best roto edge. Thank you very much, and I'll see you guys in the next class.